Hello everyone, welcome back to the Age of Warhammer. My name is Valhamma, back today with a review on the Liber Imperium book. This one is quite overdue, I'm really sorry about that. Real life basically got in the way. Started a new job and sorting out some stuff with the house just meant that things from a content perspective got pushed back a bit. But you're going to get a load of content from me in the next couple of days, so enjoy that. Overall, I'm really pleased with this book. I'm really glad that it's come out when it has. It's really nice to see the continued expansion of the Heresy game in the second edition, expanding it beyond just Marines. So in this book, as I'm sure everyone's aware by now, we have the Custodes, the Sisters of Silence, the Solar Auxilia and the Assassins. This is very much skewed as a Loyalist book, and the only faction that can be used in a traitor army from this book is the Solar Auxilia. Everyone else is by default a Loyalist, to the point of either being Loyalist, having the Loyalist keyword, special rule, sorry, or an outright army building rule of this army can only be taken as an agent of the Emperor. Overall, the book's about the same size as the Mechanicum book. We've got the price confirmed now at 37.50 RRP. Content and quality I'm really pleased with. It's the same kind of hardbound style we've seen for the other Liber books so far. Quality's great, the printing quality is always lovely for these books. The image is nice and crisp, the text is nice and clear. Choice of colour is nicely done. All in all, a really nice quality book. As far as I can tell, there aren't any new colour plates, so you're not going to see any new kind of schematics from what we saw in the black books. There are potentially some new colour schemes at the back for the Solar Auxilia. I haven't checked through book 4 from the first edition with any great depth, but they seemed fairly familiar, things like the Chthonic Headhunters, things like that. But it's still nice to have them included, to have them brought forward into the new edition of the game, and to have those reference photos in there for anyone starting a new army. They're always handy. This is going to be a slightly longer video. I'm going to try and deep dive as much as I can in the time that I have available into the 4 factions. So I will try and break the video up as needed, so feel free to skip to the bit that's most relevant for you. But yeah, hopefully see you back in just a minute. So to start us off, I want to just go through the very opening of the book, the army list section of the book, because these do play slightly differently to what we've seen in the Liber Mechanicum and the Liber Imperial, Liber Astartes and Liber Hereticus. First and foremost, as I said at the beginning, 3 of the factions in this book can only be taken by Loyalists, as you can see down this flank here. The Custodes, the Sisters of Silence and the Assassins, the current Assassins, are Loyalists only. The Imperial Army Solar Auxilia sub-faction are any allegiance, they can be Loyalist or traitor. But they are the only one in this book that can be. Everything else is Loyalist. What I will say, because it's not massively clear in some parts of this book on the ally side of things, the Legion Custodes and the Sisters of Silence are automatically sworn brothers with any Loyalist army you take them with if you take them as allies, and vice versa. They are absolutely sworn allies, sworn brothers. They cannot be reduced to anything below that. What makes it slightly unclear is that it says that all agents of the Emperor's armies are sworn brothers with Loyalist forces, and that's not entirely true. When you get to the Divisio Assassinorum section, it tells you that all assassins are treated as distrusted allies, not as sworn brothers. I'm inclined to take the latter because it's specific to them. So yeah, if you have an assassin, that assassin will be a distrusted ally into your force. Just something to bear in mind, it's not massive, but just you're not really going to be using them for scoring anyway. They don't have line for a start, so just something to be aware of going through it. We have the same Crusade Force organisation chart as the Astartes. No differences there at all, exactly the same word for word as far as I can tell, just copy and paste. Allies Matrix, again, same as we've seen before, no changes there. So this is the bit that gets a little bit confusing, but yeah, it's, as I say, it's just remember that assassins aren't sworn brothers and you're fine. And with that, we'll get on to the Legio Custodes. So, the Legio Custodes, the golden arm of the Emperor himself. Understandably, this is going to be a very elite army. Overall, they do seem to have taken a small points drop overall compared to first edition. Your basic troops are a bit cheaper. But equally, to countermand that, things like the shield captain has gone slightly up in points. Overall, I think your army will be around about the same size. You might be able to fit maybe one more unit of 5 Custodes in there, maybe an extra palace attack or something like that. but it's not going to be a big army. It's going to be a very, very elite. You're basically playing with an army of Terminators, and it should be treated accordingly. Interestingly, for the Custodes, and it explains it quite well here about why this is the case, the Custodes are not an army of soldiers, they're an army of warriors. They're all very individualistic. They don't fight with pack tactics in the same way the Astartes do. It's pointed out in one of the Black Library novels that when the Astartes are watching the Custodes fight, it's like watching a lion. It's like watching each individual warrior is fighting their own war, whereas the Astartes fight together as a squad. That's kind of brought out in their rules a little bit, particularly around the Warlord trait. So the Warlord trait, you only have one available, and it's the only one you can take. You have no access to the rulebook ones, you can only take Golden Exemplar, which basically makes your Custodes HQ a paragon of the Custodes. They're better than the other Custodes, they act as a rallying point, and they help with combat resolution anyone nearby, basically. But that's it. It doesn't give you any additional reactions, so you only have your one reaction per phase. It doesn't unlock any kind of rights of war or alternative force organisation charts. It's purely that. The Custodes are very, very much a single-use weapon in terms of how you build the army. Each Custodes itself is obviously a very flexible model, but the army itself will likely not have a huge amount of flexibility in terms of its construction. The primary change, I think, going into second edition is going to be the Nemesis rule. So the Legio Custodes is now a unit type, basically. So you get these rules down the right-hand side here. And almost all of them are based around this idea of the Nemesis. So the Custodes were not just unleashed for the sake of it for a battle. They were basically committed to the most high-risk, intense war zones, or to kill very specific targets, which are the Nemesis. So Nemesis units are things like Primarchs, Dreadnoughts, Demons, Super Heavies, Knights, anything with a weapon skill, ballistic skill, wounds or initiative value greater than 5, and your enemy Warlords. And essentially what the Custodes get is buffs when fighting against or charging into one of these units. You get +1 to your charge rolls, +1 attack, and you can never hit on worse than a 4-up. So you always hit a Nemesis unit on a 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. It's never, if it's a higher weapon skill, you're not hitting on 5s, you're still hitting on 4s. Which is quite a nice change. The only difference to that is if you're fighting a Primarch, in that point that doesn't apply, and you will hit them on 5s if you're a lower weapon skill. Overall, cool idea. I like the way that it pushes them towards being these kind of scalpels that are there to excise very particular threats, and not just a generic army that's sent in to just mop up foes. We'll see how that plays out in the battle, or battles rather, over time. For the most part, I think the weapon skill and Warlord are probably going to be the ones that get the most look in, and Dreadnought. We still don't have demons in the game particularly. We do have corrupted units in the Word Bearers. Reinforced is quite common, Primarchs are fairly common, but yeah, Dreadnoughts, weapon skill 5, and Warlords I think are going to be the primary targets for most of these rules in the early phase of the game. Moving into it, so we have, before we get into the details of the units, we'll go through some basics across the patch. Custodes infantry, as far as I can see, all have frag grenades and melter bombs as standard across the board, as well as misery cords, which are now melee weapons at strength 4 and cause instant death. Nice little change. It very much plays into the idea that the knives are very much kind of the execution tool. After you've kind of put down an enemy, you just finish them off with this knife. How much use they'll see against most enemies, probably not very much when you have a Guardian Spear, but it's a nice little touch either way. The infantry, apart from the Terminators, are movement 8 as standard, so you get +1 to charge native, and then against the Nemesis unit another +1, so you're at +2 for your charges against Nemesis. All 3 of the HQ options have area strikes. Valdor and the 2 HQ units have area strikes, which are now a -1 to the disorder roll for deep strike and flanking, but not subterranean, interestingly. I can't remember if subterranean does have a disorder roll, I'm pretty sure it does, but it doesn't affect it either way. All the normal infantry are bulky 3, Terminators and jump packs are bulky 4, stubborn and relentless and chosen warriors are also standard across the patch, so they've got a lot of rules behind them as models to kind of bring to the game. They're not really subject to the morale issues, or not morale issues, morale mechanics that we see in second edition being quite prevalent. Relentless, being able to move, shoot, and charge without penalty is very cool. And Chosen Warriors as well. These are meant to be individual heroes, and they very much feel like that with the Chosen Warriors rule. Going into the units themselves then, Constantine Valdor, first of the Custodes, the Captain General of the Legio Custodes. As has been pointed out in a few other videos and online, he is now technically a Primarch. That is obviously a rules mechanic thing. I know there is a lot of discussion, healthy debate about whether Valdor was actually one of the Primarch experiments or not, or if he was boosted by kind of some of that, but for the purposes of this video we're going to leave the lore behind and just focus on the fact that he has the Primarch rule type. It means that you can take him in the Primarch slot without sacrificing your HQ, but does mean you will need to take a Shield Captain or a Tribune as well as him for a legal force organisation chart. That doesn't seem like that big a deal. I don't think that'll be a huge problem. At 350 points, you can take him at 2k, even with the Teleporter Transponder, which puts him up by 125. Still below 500 points, you can still fit him into a 2k list. I think at 2k, the Teleporter Transponder is going to be a bit strong, being able to deep strike Valdor and 3 units of Custodes, when they have Toughness 5, 2-up saves, at minimum a 6-up invulnerable. And then being able to obviously assault with a +2 modifier to the charge roll against Nemesis or +1 native. That's quite a potentially strong set of rules to have in a smaller game like 2000 points. We'll see how that plays out. Obviously you won't have many units at 2k with Custodes, so maybe it'll be okay, and you just have to absorb a lot of firepower on turn 1 on not many units, but something to consider if you're building a friendly list. Maybe don't take the Teleporter Transponder at 2k. Statline wise, weapon skill 7, decent, nice and high. Other than that, he's pretty much 5s across the board, so he's very much in the kind of lower to mid-level Primarch territory in terms of his stats. He's got a 2+, 3+ invulnerable for defense. I really like the spear, the Apollonian spear. I know it got a little bit of hate online, but it's a strength 5 AP2 assault 2 bolter with concussive, and then in melee, specialist weapon, instant death on a 4-up, strength 7 AP2. Like, there's not much this thing isn't going to carve through with his 5 attacks basic. Obviously you can't get the second attack for 2 weapons, but it is a spear, so that makes sense. He does also retain the Lightning Blow special rule from 1st edition, so on 6s to hit, he generates additional hits. So yeah, all in all, I think he's in a good place. He's got counter-attack built in as well. I really like Valdor. I think he'll start to see quite a lot of table time. And if nothing else, he's a cool-looking model, I think, in my opinion. Moving on, the Tribune, everyone's favourite HQ from 1st edition. You saw these pretty much spaffed into every list you could get your hands on. They have changed slightly now. You can only ever include a maximum of 1 of them, and it can only be in points of at least 3,000, so you need to be playing at least a 3k game to take the Tribune. They must be your Warlord unless Valdor's part of it. Overall, I think he's still a very strong unit. Basically the same stat line as Valdor, just with 1 less wound and initiative. Still Eternal Warrior. He's fearless rather than stubborn. Has a 2-up, 4-up invulnerable. Still has the Area Strike and the Melter Bombs, all that sort of good stuff, and access to the entire armory of the Custodes for all of his various melee weapons. We are seeing this, so being the first unit, we'll talk through some of the options here because there are some new ones. The Guardian Axe, which we've seen obviously on the plastic Shield Captain Trajan Valoris, and was also on Ixion Hale's resin model, is basically the Power Fist equivalent of the Custodes. In terms of its stat line, it's about strength 8, AP2, unwieldy basically. The Meridian Swords are really cool. These are the paired weapons we see on the Custodian plastic character that came in Shadow Throne. They have some very cool rules I'll come to in a bit. And access to the Solarite weapons. So the Solarite Power Gauntlet, strength 10, AP1, and the Power Talon, which is basically a better Lightning Claw. And then the Paragon Glaive and the Paragon Blade. The Glaive being what was the Paragon Spear, and the Paragon Blade obviously being a Paragon Blade from the Astartes line. This guy can also take the Teleporter Transponder, so if you want to do some more deep striking, if you had Valdor and a Tribune in the same list, you could deep strike 6 units of Custodes. Do that at your peril, for obvious reasons, but given durability of the Custodes. I think it could be quite a fun option for a game or two. Also options for an Archaeotech pistol and a Prosadium shield. I don't think anyone would really take a Prosadium shield on the Tribune because he has a 4-up invulnerable natively, but it might look cool. Moving on, the Shield Captain is now 200 points, up from 190. Still a very solid stat line, kind of your Praetor equivalent, I guess. Weapon skill 6, 5 for ballistic skill, strength and toughness. 3 wounds, initiative 5, 5 attacks. He's still an absolute beatstick. 2-up, 4-up, same as the Tribune. It comes with the Area Strike as well, but doesn't have access to the Transponder Array. The main difference between the Tribune and the Shield Captain is basically your Eternal Warrior, Fearless, they've got Stubborn instead, and the lack of the Teleporter Transponder. Other than that, they're very similar units. These are your kind of paragons of the Custodian Guard type thing. Overall, very cool unit, but won't dwell on it too much longer. The Heterian Guard, they've had a bit of a switch up. 225 points, pretty much 5s across the board with 3 wounds each, 4 attacks. 2-up, 6-up, I believe. Let me just double check. Yeah, 2-up, 6-up, 6-up invulnerable for them. These guys start with the Meridian Sword, so it seems like a good chance to talk about them. Essentially, you have 3 stat lines with the Meridian Swords. You can either do kind of a blender style attack, you can do one single big strike, aiming to take down kind of hard targets, or you can do kind of like an assassination beheading strike, if I remember rightly. I'll check in a bit. But it's nice to have that flexibility, and it makes this unit quite variable. You can put them into almost any target, and they'll have some use. And obviously they've got the upgrade options as well, very similar to the Shield Captain. They've got kind of access to all of the spears, bar a Paragon Spear, the Guardian Axe, the Power Gauntlet. They can take twin Power Talons as well if you want a dual Lightning Claw Custodian. Have access to the Vexilla, as well as Prosadium Shields to get them to a 5-up invuln if you really want to. The other thing to mention, because I've just spotted it on the unit type there, the entirety of the Custodes have Skirmish as their subtype. This gets them back to having the 3-inch unit coherency we saw from the Sodality rule from 1st edition. Also gives you that buff in cover, which is quite nice as well. How much cover you'll be using with these guys with the 2-up armor save is potentially dubious, but obviously if you're trying to phase off las cannon shots, then getting some extra cover is no bad thing. Also kind of plays into the idea that these guys take heart in things like the blood games, so they are used to being stealthy, they just don't tend to bring that to battle. But it does play into that little niche of the background, which I quite like as well. Aquilon Terminators, these guys are the kind of the heavies, so they're movement 7 rather than 8, so they don't get the +1 to charge as you'd expect. Basically, Cataphracti, Custodians, nothing really unexpected there. The Lastrum Bolter is very cool. It's now an Assault 3, Strength 5, AP 4 with Shred, and they start with a Solarite Gauntlet for Strength 10, AP 1. You can swap that out for a Power Talon, and you can exchange the Bolter for a range of different things like the Adrathic Destructor or the Fire Pike. You can also take the Solarite Power Talon instead of the Bolter, and what's interesting with that is that because the Solarite weapons aren't specialist weapons, if you had the Power Gauntlet and the Power Talon, these guys got to 4 attacks each basic. Both weapons are AP 2. It just depends if you want to mince a squad or hit something that's a bit tougher. But it's a nice kind there to have kind of a proper blender unit of Custodian Terminators. Moving on to the Achilles, good old Spear Dreadnought. This is one of my favourite models in the range. I think it's just stunning. I think the options for its posability and just the detail that goes into it is absolutely beautiful. I love it to pieces. And it absolutely rocks its stats. Weapon skill 6, BS 5, so it's a better Contempted Dreadnought. Strength 8 native rather than Strength 7. Still 6 wounds, 2-up with an Automatic Deflector for a 5-up invuln. The Dread Spear is brutal. It's a Strength 12 AP2 Exoshock 4-up melee weapon, making it really good for killing off vehicles or other dreadnoughts. With its 4 attacks. Doesn't have brutal though, so you're going to want to charge into a wounded dreadnought. It's not going to take out a fully healthy dreadnought, sadly. The Las Pulse that comes built in is 3 shots at Strength 9 AP3. The AP3 is interesting. I guess it's to show that it's a rapid fire las cannon rather than kind of a proper piercing las cannon. It's fine for picking off, 2 wound models without an invuln save, so your veterans and your kind of Legion specific units. But it's a bit wasted against, you know, tactical marines and assault marines, and obviously Terminators have invuln saves they can take, and it's AP3, so they're on their 2-up anyway. So yeah, bit hit and miss on the las, but still fun. Power Fist with a Lastrum Bolter. We covered the Lastrum Bolter in the last one, and that is upgradable to a Destructor or a Flamer. The Gravis Power Fist is the same as the Contemptor one, so it's just brutal, brutal 3, AP2, all that goodness. Moving into the troops now, so the Custodian Guard, these guys are cheaper, so are the Sentinels. They're 150 points base and they're 45 points per model now. So quite a considerable drop, 15 points off the base cost and then 10 points off per Custodian. Again, the same special rules that I talked about at the beginning. These are your kind of line units. You only have the 2 options for your line. Basically 5s across the board apart from 2 wounds and 4 attacks. Leadership 9 stubborn, 2 up and 6 up invulnerable. Any model can change its Guardian Spear out for either a Pyrithic, Andrastic or Guardian Axe. I think what we might see is kind of 1 or 2 of the specials scattered into a 5-man unit. I could well see like a Guardian Axe being taken per squad, just to get something with that kind of that strength 8 for instant death against Marines in there. Maybe the Parathites and Adrastite for kind of some more potent range. In melee they're the same as the Guardian Spear. It can also take a Vexilla. Overall, really solid unit. They've not really changed a huge amount, just got a bit cheaper. The Sentinels are pretty much the same, just with the sword and board, so we won't linger on them too much. The only thing I will say is that they can take either the Solar Power Talon or Gauntlet, so you can have kind of a Shield and Lightning Claw or Shield and Power Fist on these guys, which is cool. Cronus Grav Carrier, 180 points, Power of the Machine Spirit, Outflank and Deep Strike is standard, so if you are going for a kind of a Deep Strike list, this might be another way of getting it into your list for smaller points, or if you're not taking Valdor or Tribune. Movement 16, fairly quick, BS5, fairly durable, 5 hull points with decent armour, and has a flare shield as standard, but the access point is only at the rear, and it's not an assault vehicle. So yeah, not sure on this for the combat units. Maybe if you wanted to deep strike a unit of Sagittars, could be quite fun. How much use it'll see going forward, TBD. I know it wasn't a hugely popular unit in first edition. I don't think that's going to massively change in second, if I'm being honest. The jet bikes, these are where we start getting some spicy bits. So 3 jet bikes are standard for 265. They're now the cavalry type with skirmish and anti-grav. They also have deep strike as standard and hammer of wrath and outflank, so they've got a huge number of rules going for them. The interesting thing is they've now been put into this war gear called Auric Demiplate, which is basically lighter custodian armour. So it's a 3-up armour save and a 6-up invulnerable, basically to represent the lighter armour they wear on their lower half and on the arms. Nice touch, stops them from being, you know, too horrific. Being toughness 5 and 3 wounds, I could see these guys eating missiles quite a lot. Might give crack missiles a decent target in the Custodes list, which otherwise is, you know, 2-up armor saves and high armor. But equally, they are 3 wounds and toughness 5, so they're not going down instantly. You're needing 3 crack missiles to kill each one. So yeah, they've got a lot of survivability still. They start off. The Custodes Gear Falcon jet bike has a weapon built in. I can't remember off the top of my head what it is, but they do have a couple of options for the Adrathic Destructor or twin-linked Las Pulsar instead. Both are pretty good. Yeah, these guys pack a punch. Both. Oh, there we go. Lastrum Bolt Cannon is the standard. All of those weapons pack a bit of a punch. It depends on what you want. If you're going for anti-infantry, the Bolt Cannon's great. If you're going for anti-tank, the Las Pulsar or the Devastator are both pretty good. The Palace Attack Speeder, they have now changed the name. It's no longer a Grav Attack Speeder, it's just the Palace Attack Speeder. So I'm sure Tabletop Tactics will be happy with that, because I'm pretty sure they hated the original name. These guys haven't changed a huge amount. There are 3 hull points now. I think they were 2 before. Still lightly armoured with a flare shield as standard, and the Arachnus Blaze Cannon built in. Again, deep strike and outflank, so these guys can give you some mobility. Can have a squadron of up to 3, again at 60 points per additional model, and you can swap out the Arachnus Blaze Cannon for the Adrathic Devastator as well. The Venatari, so these are your kind of your jump troop. Custodians, the ones with the Eagle Warrior jump packs. Movement 8 is standard, but obviously the jump packs give you the increased movement to 14, same as any other jump pack. It gives you extra range, stops you getting slowed by terrain, but all difficult terrain is dangerous. You can still run, but you can't shoot or charge if you do, and you can't use the jetpack as part of a reaction. These guys are also in the demi-plate, so a 3-up save basic, with the Tarsus bucklers as well. These are interesting. They reduce the strength of energy type weapons, so melter, plasma, las, things like that are all at -2 strength against these guys if they have the shield. I quite like that. I think it gives them a bit of a niche area of you're making plasma wound you on 4s against your toughness 5. Melters are only on 3s. Kind of take the teeth out of some of the support squad options that we see quite a lot on the board at the moment. You can change that out for a Venatari Lance if you want them to be better in combat. Their pistols, the kinetic destroyers, are absolute hand cannons. These things are pistol 3 autocannons, strength 7 AP4 with rending. These things are savage. I'm really excited to see these on the table. Again, deep strike built in, as you'd expect for a jump pack unit, so another unit that can give you some board control and some threat range. If you're going to deep strike them, you'd probably go with the lance to get the charge off, but I mean they're still strength 5 in combat with the pistols. They're not slouches, so who knows? Maybe we'll see some pistol ones used as well. The Sagittarian Guards are into the heavy support. These guys are the ones carrying basically the portable heavy bolters. These are the ones I think that will get the most use out of the Coronis Grav Carrier, because the bolt caliber isn't huge range. It's far enough, but it's not massive. And having the option to kind of move them up in a transport, disembark and fire, I think is probably going to be where these guys see some use. The bolt caliber itself is basically a 4-shot assault heavy bolter, but it has the alternative fire mode for an assault 1 instant death, strength 5 AP2 gun. This is kind of your Terminator killers. You want them getting up close to elite units and just blasting away. I quite like them. I think they've had a bit of a glow up. I think they're a bit cheaper than they were. They're 175 now. I think they were around 200 before. Hopefully we'll see some in lists, and it'll be a nice change to just taking Heteron Guard and basic Custodes. The Caladius, this thing was the absolute bane of my life in first edition. It killed a lot of my men. I don't think that's likely to change. It's fast, it's got heavy armour, 13, 13, 11, with 4 hull points, deep strike is standard, power of the machine spirit and outflank, flare shield is baked in. The accelerator autocannon is a 3-shot strength 8 AP3 rending brutal twin linked gun, so all of the rules attached. The main gun itself is interesting. I think it kind of suffers from the same problem as the Las Pulsar on the Achilles Dread. The AP3 just means that you're not getting that impact against Terminators, especially with only 3 shots twin linked. So it's reliable, it's going to hit a lot, but it's only really going to be getting through power armor on a regular basis, so not sure on this one, a little bit torn. We'll see how it plays out. The Galatia Dread, or Galatus, sorry, Galatus Dreadnought. This one is down a bit. It was 250, I'm pretty sure, with the shield and board. Sword and board. Similar stat line, or identical stat line to the other Custodes Contemptor. Weapon skill 6, you're hitting other Contemptors on 5s. The shield gives you a 4-up invulnerable, which is nice, so you got that 1-up from an Atamantic Deflector, but still has the Atamantic Deflector to stop you being instant deathed. Sword is a strength 8 AP2 instant death, but no brutal. I think the lack of brutal might let it down a little bit. I would have maybe liked to see that be brutal too. Might have pushed it a bit too far the other way. That might have made it a bit too good. But I'm interested to see how that will go against things like Cataphractii Terminators with a 4-up invulnerable on them, and whether we'll see that kind of piercing through those units with any kind of reliability. The Telemon is up in points. It's up by a pretty whopping 45 points compared to first edition. 365 now. Obviously it's your Leviathan equivalent. Weapon skill 6, same as the other Custodes Dreadnoughts, but strength and toughness 8 and 8 wounds. 5 attacks basic. The Caestus are pretty savage. basically strength 10 specialist weapons with Sunder and AP2, but again, no Brutal, which is interesting. Brutal's quite rare in the Custodes, kind of like with the Mechanicum, they don't seem to have applied it to a huge amount of stuff, but it does pop up occasionally in a couple of places. The main gun that I think most people were familiar with in previous times was the Storm Cannon. It's still good. It's 3 shots at strength 8 AP1 with Lance and Exoshock 6, so this thing is going to eat through particularly light armor, but even heavy armor, moving Spartans and Land Raiders down to armor 12 before firing at them with strength 8. Yeah, it's gonna put some work in. And the bolt launcher it has as standard is going to absolutely rinse through particularly light infantry, so things like your scout squads or Solar Auxilia. Strength 6, heavy 8 and pinning, so that's your kind of lockdown the enemy before the charge kind of unit. Hammer of Wrath 3, same as a Leviathan, and move through cover. This one also has a rear strikes, so great for, you know, if you can't afford to have a lot of the HQs in there with the rear strikes, you can get one of these and it'll do the job for you. On to the Lords of War. There are 2 still same as before, so we have the Orion assault dropship and the Ares gunship. I don't think we'll see a huge amount of the Orion, if I'm honest. It's 600 points. In an already elite army, that's a lot of units to be losing for the sake of an assault vehicle. It's cool. I really like it, and I really hope to see them on the table. I think people will just take Valdor with a teleporter transponder for 125 points less and just deep strike 3 units in instead of using the assault vehicle rule. I think the Ares has a little bit more play in it. It's 650 points, but does have that fairly sizable nose gun, which is basically going to start knocking over knights and super heavies as if they're not really there. Destroy 2, strength 10, 81 lance with Exoshock 4. This thing is putting down basically 2 penetrating hits a turn, minimum with Exoshock 4. More likely 3 or 4 penetrating shots a turn. It's going to make a serious dent in whatever you pointed at, because it's got other guns as well on top of that, obviously. Overall, I like them. The 2 Lords of War, I'm not sure how often they'll be played, which is a bit of a shame, but we are where we are. As a whole, I think the Custodes are in a good place. I think they're relatively well balanced, and the points changes mean that you're likely going to see more line units, so you won't see, you know, your basic 2-3-man custodian squads, and then all the toys. You're probably going to see 3, maybe even 4 5-man custodian guard or sentinel guard squads. And then the remainder of the points spent on the fun stuff. I think lists might struggle against them a little bit. Some lists, anyway. Like Fury of the Ancients will still more than happily take on the Custodes, as it will with the Astartes. But like, as an Astartes player, or even as a Mechanicum player, you do have to be aware of the fact that you're fighting an army of Terminators. They're 2 wounds, toughness 5, 2 up saves. Treat them accordingly, and you'll probably be fine. They're always going to be outnumbered. Play the objectives, play the mission. But yeah, really excited to see them on the table again, which is cool. We'll leave it there for the Custodes, and we'll come back in just a moment with the Sisters of Silence. Okay, on to the Sisters of Silence. Of all the factions in this book, I think these have had the most done to them, the biggest overhaul since first edition. They're now very much a standalone army in their own right, both in terms of the unit choices. They've got a couple new units added in, but also the way that you construct the army from the Chambers Militant, which I'll get into in a moment. You can absolutely do a 3,000 point list of Sisters of Silence and not be limited or kind of cowed by what you can and can't take. Essentially, you have 3 chambers, your 3 Chambers Militant, which give you some special rules. So Chamber of Vigilance, Chamber of Oblivion, Chamber of Judgment. Chamber of Vigilance is your primary chamber. This is where most of your units will come from, and there are no limits on the number of Vigilance units you can take. Chamber of Oblivion, these are your Demon Hunters. They are fearless in combat against demons and corrupted. A lot of them have the ex-Oblivio rule as well, so at the start of combat you can roll a d6. On a result of a 2 to 6, your enemy is at -1 weapon skill. On a 1, you take a wound. And then Chamber of Judgment is your Witch Hunters. They are fearless against Psykers in combat. And the way it works basically is that your HQ choices, whether they're your Warlord or not, add 3 units from their chamber. So each of the HQs is from one of these 2 chambers, Oblivion or Judgment. Every one you add to your list gives you access to up to 3 units from their chamber. So if you had 2 Oblivion and 1 Judgment, you could have 6 Oblivion and 3 Judgment units. The Warlord traits also add to that, so whichever chamber your Warlord is from, they get +1 unit from their chamber. That's common across all of them. As you'd expect, these are more similar to the Astartes ones than the Custodes ones. They also get you an additional reaction in either the assault, shooting, or movement phase, depending on which one you take. And they've got some pretty cool little rules, very thematic. Maiden of Blood allows you to do an extra round of attacks at the end of combat before deciding who wins. Maiden of Resolve, as the name suggests, you basically just don't move. You cannot move, you cannot I don't think you can charge either, but I can't remember off the top of my head. Can't move or react until the start of your next turn, but you automatically pass all morale and pinning checks. You get Feel No Pain 4-up and Eternal Warrior. Great if you need a unit to just hold for that little bit longer. And then the Maiden of Sorrow. When your Warlord or their unit suffer a wound, they gain +1 attack and movement until the end of your next turn. Capped at a +4. So if you take 4 wounds, you are then at movement 10 and something like between 6 and 10 attacks each, depending on which models you have in the unit. That's pretty nice. The Warlord also never counts as giving away victory points if taken away if killed in combat. So things like Slay the Warlord just doesn't apply if this Warlord dies in combat, which is also quite handy. In terms of some kind of generic ones across the board, as standard, the Sisters of Science are movement 6, strength and toughness 3, weapon skill, ballistic skill 4, frag and crack grenades on everybody, psych out grenades on HQ, and light and anathema unit subtypes with some skirmish scattered in as well. So all in all, very much playing on that kind of fast paramilitary strike force kind of vibe, which I really dig. Onto the units then. The HQ section is very full, but one unit I think that we'll see in almost every Sisters list, at least early on, is going to be Kroll. For 150 points, she's an absolute bargain. Weapon skill 6, strength 5, AP 1, instant death 5 up, and duelist edge in melee. A 2-up, 4-up invulnerable, 3-up invulnerable against template and blast. Counts as being 6 inches further away when she's getting shot at. Never counts as being in line of sight for the barrage rule. Gives preferred enemy demon, psycho, and corrupted if she's on the table. If there are none of those units, she can give 3 units infiltrate instead, and increases reactions by 1 in the assault phase, and 2 extra units from the Chamber of Oblivion, on top of this list of special rules, which is considerable. Yeah, she's an absolute bargain for what you get, and I think she's going to be rocking a lot of tables in the near future, which is good to see. She's got a lovely model, and it's good to see that she now backs up her stat line and can put in some work on the table. Moving on, the Knight Abyssal and the Knight Centura, these are your kind of 2 Chamber of Oblivion characters. The Abyssal Knight, or Knight Abyssal, sorry, is your kind of premier demon hunter sister. 2-up armor, 5-up invuln, 3-up invuln versus template and blast. Weapon skill, ballistic skill 6 is standard. Weirdly, she has a higher ballistic skill than Kroll, but we'll skip past that. Execution Blade is standard, which is the greatsword, +2 strength, AP 3, rending 6-up, but access to a few other options like a standard power weapon, carnival weapon, Paragon Blades, Proteus Neurolash, things like that. So a decent number of options there, and a healthy set of special rules as well. They're quite special rules heavy, the Sisters, between their kind of hatreds or precision strikes and Ex Oblivio, fleet as well on quite a few models. So yeah, a really nice unit. Knight Centura, very similar, basically just one step down from the Knight Abyssal. The less experienced version, so weapon skill BS5, other than that, very, very similar. Basically the same special rules, just stubborn, not fearless. And if you think about it in terms of the Custodes, that's your Tribune, that's your Shield Captain, same sort of deal. But yeah, other than that, fun units, very characterful, and a cool opportunity to have a great sword wielding maiden just running up the field at somebody. The Silent Judge and the Silent Fury, these are your judgment equivalent. So the Silent Judge is your kind of Knight Centura equivalent, but for the Chamber of Judgment, so your witch hunting leader. Very interesting set of rules. Prevents reactions to shooting or charges unless fearless. So if you use this unit to charge in with, the opponent can't overwatch you unless they're fearless. Does give up an extra VP for Warlord trait though. This is based on the Excrucia Armatus, if I remember rightly. The Distort Field and the Spectra Cloak, two other bits of wargear that she has, means she counts a total of 12 inches further away for shooting. Essentially, she can never be shot by a pistol, which is hilarious. Always out of line of sight for Barrage. 5 up Invuln in melee. Sorry, 5 up Invuln to shooting, 6 up Invuln in melee. A really cool number of wargear options. Possibly my favourite new addition is the compression tanks. So if you have a flame weapon, you can trigger the compression tanks once per game to get +2 strength on them, which is quite handy. So strength 6 flamers is not out of the question. Overall, yeah, really nice unit. The Silent Fury is basically the same as the Silent Judge, but has the very exciting addition of being on an Arrhenius jet bike. Also, we haven't seen models for jet bikes for the sisters yet, so that implies they are coming. Very cool, looking forward to that. No Spectra Cloak on them, by contrast to the Judges, but still has a Distort Field, so still 6 inches further away for shooting. And the jet bike itself gives you 6 up Shrouded or 5 up Shrouded if it runs. Again, a healthy list of special rules right there with some precision strikes and shots, hatred, relentless, all that good stuff you'd expect from a jet bike as well. Deep strike and outflank as well. I really like this unit. I love the fast attack version as well. We'll come to later on. I think these are going to be a really cool addition to the game and to the Sisters Army. Onto the retinues then. The Questora Cadre. These are Chamber of Judgment. So these are the ones that you put with things like the Silent Judge. They are the infantry one. Interestingly, they have line built in, so kind of like when you have a command squad for the Astartes with the Legion banner giving them line. These ladies just have it as standard, it's part of their unit type. So you can't, snipe out the banner and they lose line. The entire unit has it. When you combine that with things like the Maiden of Resolve, the Warlord trait I spoke about earlier, these girls are going to be hard to shift. They're going to sit on an objective and dare you to go and push them off at the end of the game. They do have the support squad rule, but it doesn't really apply because they're a retinue. You can only take them as a retinue with a Chamber of Judgment character. I think you can take them as a unit in their own right, but realistically you just take the Oblivion one if you had an Oblivion unit, in my opinion. They start with a Vrantine Bolter, which basically is a slightly better bolter. But on the plus side, you have a massive list of special weapons. You've got 2 bolt pistols, assault needlers, flamers with the compression tank option. 2 models can have nemesis bolters or Adrathic destructors. You can have snare guns. There's loads of really cool options in there to make a really characterful unit. And you have the option to take things like an augury scanner and a Nuncio Vox. For 65 points base and 20 points per model, I think one of these retinues is going to be in almost every list. Probably 2 of them, to be honest, because you're going to have at least 2 HQs, I suspect. And these aren't limited at 0 to 1, so I think these will be picked quite a lot. And unlike the Astartes one, these aren't just for your Warlord, these are retinues for any character. Or rather, not for Master of Legion, they're for any HQ choice, sorry. The Raptora Cadre, these ones are ones that we know about from kind of the lore. Obviously, Kroll is head of the Raptora, if I remember rightly. So these are your Oblivion equivalent to the Questoras. Basically the same line, cool unit special rules, and a few options. They haven't got the same depth of wargear that you see in the Chamber of Judgment. The Chamber of Judgment definitely got all the toys, but they do start with an Executioner Blade, which is really cool. So all in all, I can't say that I'm too disappointed in these ones. They're also weapon skill 5 base, so they're matching most Space Marine characters for weapon skill. and beating things like Terminators. 95 points for 3 and 25 points extra model. Augury Scanner, but they have bolt pistols, I don't know why you'd bother. And Nuncio boxes as well for leadership at night fights and any kind of deep striking shenanigans you might want to pull. That's where I can see them pairing quite well with the Custodes, because the Custodes don't have Voxes built into them. I don't think there's any unit that can have a Nuncio Vox in the Custodes list. So if you had the Sisters allied in, you'd be able to use their Nuncio Voxes to deep strike with, which is quite cool. The Vestal Convent, this is a 0-1 Elite's choice. These ladies are essentially your apothecaries. What I find a bit weird, and I'm trying to wrap my head around how this is going to really work, you deploy them as a unit. When they're deployed to the battlefield, you deploy them all within coherency and then operate independently afterwards, and not treated as a unit. They are independent characters though, so they can join units, but it means that you have to, based on that wording, you have to deploy them as a unit and then run them into units to go and start the game in so they don't get shot. I don't know why they've done it that way. Personally, I would have rather seen them act as the apothecaries from the Marines list and just be dropped into units. Feels a bit weird that they're not, but is what it is. But yeah, it means you get feel no pain for your sisters. Great, fantastic. Moving on, Oblivion Cadre. These are basically your lower ranked version of the Raptoras. So these are your Chamber of Oblivion Elite, Demon Hunters, Executioner Blades. 5 in the unit for 100 points, 15 points per model after that. They can have power weapons, carnival weapons, or Proteus Neurolashes for free. And the leader can take some pistol options. Again, it's sisters with great swords. What's not to like about it? I think these are really cool. No line, sadly, unlike their retinue equivalent, but that's to be expected. They're the elite's choice. Still only 1 wound, so they're a little bit fragile, but a really fun unit and one that I hope to see some on the table of. Eradicator Cadres, 65 base for 5, 10 per for up to 10 in the unit, so 5 additional models. These are essentially your elite Sisters of Silence. These aren't of any particular chain. They're a Chamber of Vigilance unit, so you can have as many of them as you like. Again, they don't have line. They do have some weapons options. They're kind of like your Tactical Veteran Squad. I'm not sold. I think I'd rather take Oblivion Knights or maybe a Prosecutor Cadre and have the line instead. I don't think being the veteran unit really adds much to them, unfortunately, but that's just my take. They do have precision shots, so you can give them a Magna Combi Melter and precision shot 6 and hope you roll some 6s. I don't think these will see as much table time as I would hope, but such is life. The Prosecutors and the Vigilators, these are your 2 troop choices. So you've got your Bolters and you have your Execution Blades, so the 2 units you can build straight out of the box. Stat line is about what you'd expect. 4s for weapon skill, ballistic skill, 3s for strength and toughness. Bolters are standard for the Prosecutors, great swords for Vigilators. You can have the units up to 15 people in size. Prosecutors are Chamber of Vigilance, Vigilators are Chamber of Oblivion, so again, you need to have the HQ to unlock them. But you can take as many of these as you want. Yeah, they're your line troops. There's not much more to be said, really. It's just the heart of the Sisters lists. The Charon Inquisitor. So this is your transport, the triangular kind of slug transport. 150 points, so not cheap. But 4 hull points, decent armor, 16 transport capacity, so you can have a full squad of your troops, plus a character in there if you really wanted to. Has quite a lot of rules. It's an assault vehicle, night vision, deep strike, outflank, and has the same Chamber Militant as the unit it's selected for. So if you had a Chamber of Oblivion, you would have a Chamber of Oblivion Inquisitor. A couple of guns and Spectre Distort Field, so reduces enemy range by 8 inches, so you're kind of 8 inches further away for shooting. Looks fairly durable, and again, if you're doing a full list of sisters, you'll probably take 1 or 2. If you're doing an allied detachment, maybe not, but we'll see how that plays out. Pursuers, these are a unit I'm really excited for. I cannot wait to see what they do with these from a model perspective, because we've seen Cyber Mastiffs from Necromunda, but we haven't seen things like the Felidae, the Caimans, and the Raptors. I guess the Cyber Caiman could be a Sump Croc if you're looking for a model in the short term. And the Raptor, there are some birds around, but yeah, it's. I think this will lead off the Necromunda models a little bit from the various beasts that the factions can get. Essentially, it's a group of Beastmasters, 3 models, and for each of the pursuit, each of your sisters' models, you can take a beast. Pursuit beast, they have their own weapons table, their own stat lines. They've got their own special rules, either things like Fleet or Furious Charge, Rage, Feel No Pain. Again, they don't have lines, so these are going to be very much just there to kind of harry and hold up the enemy. Maybe a flank skirmish force to take down the side, or to go and try and deal with things like recon units at the back of the board. As a modelling choice, I'm really excited for these. As a gaming choice, we'll have to wait and see what they end up with. But either way, they're very cool. Firebrand Cadre, these are your kind of flamer-wielding sisters. Again, Chamber of Judgment, as you'd expect from a Witch Hunter unit. Full flamers across the board. They can all take compression tanks, so you're at +2 strength on the flamers for once per game, or you can swap out for grenade launchers and snares. Again, not a line unit, but a really cool little support unit, kind of analogous to Tactical Support Squad. Yeah, not much more to be said really on those. The Subjugator Cadre, 105 base for 3 models. These are your Chamber of Judgment jet bikes. These are the ones that match the Silent Judge on jet bike. Again, cannot wait to see the models for these. I'm really excited to see some new designs for jet bikes, especially for the sisters. I think they're going to be a very cool unit, regardless of what the rules are. I think I would at least take a unit of 3, just on the fact that they're jet bikes. Just a very cool idea, nice to see. They do have access to termites. Termites is exactly the same as it is for the Space Marines. Nothing really to be said about those, but it's cool they have them. I like the idea. The Sanctioners. So these are essentially your snipers. So if you take a recon Space Marine unit and make them sisters, that's these ones. So they have the Nemesis Bolter as standards. They're BS4 basic. They have the Marked for Death rule, which we've seen from the Seekers. These are your character killers extraordinaire for the sisters. Much like with the recon squads, I think we'll see at least a unit in most lists just for the Nemesis Bolters. Downside, unlike the Space Marine equivalent, they don't have line, but overall a really cool unit, and who doesn't like snipers? They can take the Vratine Nemesis Bolters, which makes them a bit more of a close range unit, but it's very much for killing Psykers, and then the Vratine Nemesis rules are around killing Psykers. So I think they'll probably stick with their Nemesis bolt rifles bolters more often than not. Nothing wrong with that. I think they're cool. The Expurgator Cadre, these are your heavy flamers. So if you take the Subjugators from the previous section, these are their big sisters. Again, Chamber of Judgment. Option for compression tanks, I think. Yep, they can take compression tanks. So a heavy flamer with +2 strength. Pretty sure that makes them strength 7, so not quite instant deathing Space Marines, but not far off. If you had access to some rad grenades somewhere from one of your other units, then instant killing Space Marines with heavy flamers. It's pretty tidy. They can swap out for an Adrathic Destructor, a missile launcher, or a snare cannon, and they can have an augury scanner as well. So they've got some decent kind of versatility in there as well. Can have a unit of up to 10. Again, I think we'll probably see a unit of these in most lists. These are your only 2 heavy support choices, by the way, so you've got either snipers or a heavy flamer, which can swap out for heavy weapons. So overall, I think it's fairly clear we'll see these quite early on in many lists. Again, much like with the jet bikes being new models, we've got some options here under the heavy flamers. So given that heavy flamers themselves I don't think are currently a model unit for the sisters, we'll probably see a sisters plastic weapon set, I suspect, with things like 5 heavy flamers, 5 destructors, 5 missile launchers, 5 snare cannons, or maybe split down into kind of snare cannons as one and heavies as another. I'm not sure how they'll do it, but I'd be very surprised if we don't see some plastic models to sort these out going forward. Same with the Nemesis bolters, they're not currently an option either. So maybe we'll see snare guns and Nemesis bolters in one, and we'll see the heavy weapons in another. I don't know, but it's cool to speculate. And yeah, that is it for the Sisters. They have no Lords of War. Overall, I'm really happy with the changes to the army. Some of the units are maybe a little bit lackluster, but they're very, very cool just on theme and narrative. And the fact you can now take them as a full army is nice. I like that. I like the fact they have been given that kind of pride of place of, no, this is an army. They are able to be taken as a single force. They're just not, you know, a world-ending invasion force. They are a very specialist tool. They are a scalpel, not a hammer. I'm tempted by an allied detachment. I wouldn't do a whole army of them myself, but I know some friends that have full armies of Sisters, and I'm really excited for them to get them all on the table. And with that, we'll draw the Sisters to a close and come back after the jump for the Solar Auxilia. Okay, onto the Solar Auxilia. These have been expanded a bit over the first edition, both in terms of the rules and in terms of some of the units. They still have the Tercio system, which you'll remember from the rifle sections previously. Multiple units in one force organisation slot, basically. If they're in reserve, Tercios must be deployed to reserves together. Enter in the same manner. You can't have one unit deep strike and two come in from the flanks, for example. If deployed to the battlefield, each unit deploys within 3 inches of another unit in the Tercio. If that isn't possible, the entire Tercio starts in reserve, and during play, units can act independently. However, there is a benefit to keeping your units from the same Tercio together. It's called information. So if a unit is within 3 inches of at least one model from a different unit in the same Tercio, that's also in unit coherency. So you can have these kind of bricks of units together, and you get the information bonus, which plays into some of the rules within the list. What they've got now is cohort doctrines. So this is very much like your regimental doctrines from the Imperial Guard in 40k. Basically allows you to specialise and alter your army a little bit depending on where their background is and where they come from. Very cool. We'll get to those on the next page. The other thing to mention is that there is a new unit type, a unit subtype that's within the army called Close Order. So basically you have a 1-inch coherency. It's like the inverse of skirmish. You have 1-inch coherency, you can't run, and your movement reactions are at -1 inch. However, you can move half distance and still shoot heavy weapons without penalty, and you can move and charge after firing rapid fire or heavy weapons. So you can do your 3-inch half move, fire your heavy weapons and still charge, which is quite cool. I like the kind of the regimented approach that gives to them. It makes them play very differently to Space Marines. You have some limitations on movement, but you have more units, so you have good board control, and you can still lay down a lot of firepower fairly easily. Moving on to the cohort doctrines, so there are 8 of these, if I remember rightly. 4 there, yeah, 8. I can still count. These are, as I say, basically regimental traits, so they're kind of like rights of war. There are at some points some confusing wordings around sections versus tertios. Make sure you're double reading it and making sure you're understanding it. Some of it might need an errata in places. There are bits of it that still don't quite sit right for me, where it uses the words for section rather than tertio and vice versa. But regardless, they're cool rules, and I'm sure it'll be ironed out either in play or by someone with a better reading comprehension than I have at this point in time. So the first one is your solar pattern. These are your OG Solar Auxilia, the solar pattern cohorts. These were the first cohorts raised. They follow the template that was established on Jupiter. They are more elite, so you can have the Velataris Tercios as your troops choices. You can have the Arvus as your dedicated transport for Velataris. And Velataris gain the line subtype. So you can have a very elite army based around 10-man units rather than the 10 to 20-man units, with a few more weapons options and better stats, basically. You cannot have more than a single armoured tercio, so you have a maximum of 3 tanks, and only a single artillery tercio, so 1 unit of rapiers or tarantulas. The Ultramar pattern cohorts, these are the ones that basically Guilliman thought he could make better and restructure. This is basically a formation built around large blocks of infantry. Instead of using the standard tercio for rifles, this is one of the bits where the wording gets a bit silly, so auxiliary rifle sections, it's the tercio that can have up to 3 units, not the section. so that needs to be changed to Tercio in my opinion. But essentially you use this instead, so you can have up to 6 rifle sections in the Tercio, and the Tercio consists of up to 6 units, so it's more of a Sexio, but you probably shouldn't call it that out loud. As long as the models in the rifle sections are in base-to-base contact with each other, so one more than the close order, you're actually touching the other models, you get +1 to hit. So these are very much your kind of... They're almost like Mordians from 40k, I guess. Which is cool, I like that. The limitation being you can never take dedicated transports for rifles or for line command sections, so you are a dedicated infantry force. I don't think we'll see many of those until Solar Auxilia come out in plastic. I can't see anyone wanting to paint, you know, up to 60 Solar Auxilia for a single troop's choice in resin. I might be wrong. People that already have armies, feel free to correct me. But yeah, I think that's one to wait until they're in plastic, potentially. The Reborn cohorts, narrative-wise, these are probably my favourite. Essentially, these are your retired soldiers who went on the Great Crusade, survived the Great Crusade, retired to become nobles, governors, generals of worlds. At the wake of the Horus Heresy, got their old gear out the cupboard, dusted it down, and went off into the stars to go and fight again for either side, the War Master or the Emperor. To represent that experience, they get +1 leadership and they get the Stubborn special rule. And if they haven't moved, they can reroll 1s to hit. Very cool rule. Shows their kind of their experience. The fact that these are, you know, the old men of the Great Crusade back to battle again. Similar to the solar pattern in the restrictions, only 1 armored tercio, 1 artillery tercio, and furthermore, because of their advanced age, shall we say, they count their initiative as 1 for running when rolling as part of a sweeping advance or making a movement reaction. So they're not quick in terms of their reactive movement or running, but you know, they're old. Armoured Fist pattern cohorts, these are your kind of the Armageddon style, fully mounted mechanised formations. Armoured tercios can be taken as non-compulsory troops, so you have troop tanks. They don't get line, but troop tanks. Single Solar Auxilia armoured command section, consisting of a single Leman Russ, can be taken as an HQ. So this is your armoured company, essentially. This Leman Russ tank gains the Cohort Doctrine special rule to unlock this. So the same way with an armoured spearhead for the Astartes, you must take the tank and then it gets the rule. Same thing here, essentially. Also must be the army's warlord. Increases its ballistic skill by 1 and gets a 5 invulnerable save for its trouble. The limitation being that everyone must begin embarked on a transport or in reserves if they're infantry. What this doesn't have is what the Astartes one has, which is that if you are going second and your transport is blown up, your models die. As we've seen from the Astartes one, these guys don't have that problem. So you can pop transports all day long and the Solar will just stand there and wait for their turn. The penal cohort, you can have an army of elite criminals. Why not? Cue the 18 music in the background. So you lose close order, you gain furious charge. Oh no, sorry, the feral lose close order. You get furious charge 1. You can swap out your las rifle or Volkite charger for a range of other kind of lesser weapons, shotguns, las carbines, things like that. And 1 auxilia in each rifle section can take a heavy stubber. Interesting choice. Not sure how that'll play out, but you know, mobile heavy weapons, because you've obviously got the half move from close order. They also get Feel No Pain 6 up, which is cool, but you're still only toughness 3, so how often that will come into play, I'm not sure. Sorry, no, you do lose the close order subtype. I was right, you do lose the close order. And you can only have 1 unit of Veltaris, which are kind of your elite Solar Auxilia, so again, you're very much focused on playing a horde of angry boys. The feral pattern, these guys can take Fear for 25 points a unit, Fear 1, which is quite cool. And they also gain counterattack 1 while in formation. So back on what I was saying at the beginning about if you have multiple units within 3 inches of each other, if you do that with the ferals, they all get counterattack 1, which is nice. So you can have this nice line of feral Solar Auxilia waiting for the enemy to charge them. You must charge if you're able to, and you're always counted as distrusted allies regardless of the normal allies matrix, so no one trusts you to fight properly, they just want you to go and kill things for them. Siege pattern cohorts, these are your kind of bombardment tactics. So you can take artillery tercios, your rapiers and tarantulas, or your basilisks basically as both elites and heavy support. When making a shooting attack with barrage or blast, you can choose to reroll the scatter dice. So you basically get a free Vox caster, but you can only reroll the scattered dice itself. You can't reroll the 2d6 that go with it. You can only reroll the scatter dice. All units in this detachment must select a dedicated transport if they're able, but do not have to embark upon it, which is a bit weird, but fine. The Iron pattern, this is your kind of Iron Brethren equivalent, so you can have Mechanicum units built into your Solar Auxilia as well, without using an allied detachment. So you have Castellax and Thalax as elites, and you can have Cortex controllers on your HQs. And your Legate Marshal gains the Cohort Doctrine. Sorry, the Legate Marshal gains the Master of Automator, so you could drop him into a unit of Castellax, for example. Only a single unit of tanks and only a single unit of artillery, to counteract the fact you have Castellax running around with Dark Lancers. All in all, these are really cool. I really like the fact they're expanding the Solar Auxilia beyond just being the kind of space-based carapace armor wearing stormtroopers, basically. Gives you some real options to play different styles of Solar Auxilia, and hopefully we'll see some varied and interesting lists come out as a result of this. With them still having the 4-up save basic, things like the new Kassakin models for 40k come into play as a potential option, as well as the Scions as well, obviously being an existing model range for carapace armor. So there are already units you could use for the kind of the non-traditional Solar Auxilia, and hopefully we'll see the actual Solar Auxilia moved into plastic at some point as well. Onto the units. Legate Marshal, this is your kind of high commander. Pretty impressive stat line for a mortal. Weapon skill, ballistic skill 5, 4 wounds, initiative 4, attacks 4, 3-up save basic in his heavy void armor. You can give him artificer armor as well. If taken, he loses the heavy subtype as well, which is quite handy. Battle hardened 1, so he needs strength 8 to instant death him. Stubborn built in, refractor field, and he's the one you need to take to unlock the cohort doctrines. If you don't have a Legate Marshal, you don't get cohort doctrines. You have to just use the baseline rules. So I think for 85 points, he's going to be in almost every army we see. Get some cool war gear options, things like Inferno pistols, Architect pistols, Paragon blades. So really nice option, really cool model, a modelling opportunity. I don't think there's any reason not to take him in basically every list you write for these guys. And he, as I say, he unlocks the doctrines, so why not? The Auxilia Tactical Command Tercio, these are kind of your second line commands. So you have one command section and up to 2 companion sections. So companions are like your veterans. They're the best of the best. The little kind of text down here, I think it is, or might be on the next page, says about like sometimes the companions are those really elite stormtroopers, and sometimes they're just, the cousins of a noble who wants to show off and put them in shiny gear. Which is quite funny. I like the idea that a Legate Marshal from a world has just decided to upgrade all his friends into the elite of his army, regardless of whether they deserve to be there or not. These guys, again, they have a raised up stat line. They start off with an Auxilia Captain, which is 4's weapon skill, ballistic skill. You can upgrade him to a Marshal for 5 on weapon skill. He does get the Marshal gets a couple of other options as well. Not many, but some. I think most of the time you probably leave him as a captain, unless you particularly wanted the heavy void armor for the 3-up save, but when you've got the Legate Marshal, I don't think it's necessarily worth it. Some decent weapon options. The companions have access to kind of the full range of weaponry. You've got bolt guns, combi weapons, flamers, grenade launchers, plasmas and melters, things like that. So these are your very kind of specialist units. They're the creme de la creme of your solar, as it were. So yeah, the Tercio is basically up to 3 of these units, as we discussed previously. Whether you'd run the 2 optional companion sections, I don't know. Whether you'd even run a tactical command section, I'm not sure. I think if you had a Legate Marshal, you might forego these guys. They don't have line, they don't really add anything other than the special weapons and the stat lines. They do have Melter Bombs, which is cool, but yeah, I think I'd probably put the points into something like an Armoured Tercio instead. But some really cool modelling options and some interesting choices around kind of war gear and things like that. That's the companion, so again, very similar. You can upgrade one to an adjutant, which gets him weapon skill 5 again, same as the marshal, but they're kind of like veteran squads, but without line. I don't know why you would necessarily invest too many points in them. They do have a couple of options like the Vox Interlocks and the Auxilias, which can buff them up a bit. I'll come to what they do in a little bit. But again, I'm not sure I would invest too many points in them, personally. The Velataris, however, again, these guys don't have line, but they are heavy. These guys are the ones you kind of want to give specialist dedicated transports to. Get them up nice and close, get them unloading their firepower with Volkite charges as standard, or you can upgrade them to having things like Storm Axes or Power Axes. You can give the Prime Heavy Void Armor for 3-up save. So these ones have a bit more poke to them, I think, for a lower points cost. I think I'd rather take these than companions, personally. But your mileage may vary. They also have the option for a Vanguard section. You can only have, I think, one of these, one Vanguard section. So yeah, 0 to 1 Vanguard. They come with rotor cannons as standard. So I could well see, taking 2 units of the Storm sections and 1 Vanguard section and using that as your kind of hard-hitting or harder-hitting section of the army. They're fairly cheap as well. It's 90 points base for most of the units. 8 points for extra models. You can have up to 20 in the squad. So 20 rotor cannons from a Vanguard section is not anything to sniff at, really. They can also have heavy flamers as upgrades, which is cool. Medicaes, these, unlike with the Sisters of Silence ones, these do work like normal apothecaries. You do just assign them to units before the battle starts. You can have up to 8 of them, same as with the apothecaries from the Astartes. They're 15 points a model. The Auto Medicus is only a 6-up Feel No Pain, not a 5-up Feel No Pain, but they're mortals. It's not the end of the world. You can also give them the close order unit subtype for no cost, so if you're dropping them into a unit of standard infantry, you can give them the close order drill, which, as we've said, just gives them a few bonuses depending on what doctrine you take. There is the special character surgeon as well. This one went up on Forge World last week for pre-order. He's 60 points. You can have extra orderlies at 5 points apiece. He's pretty grim. He's kind of roll a dice and see what happens with the surgery kind of medic, but is very effective. So once per player turn, when any friendly model within 12 inches is removed as a casualty in either the movement or shooting phases, you can roll a d6 and see if he stays in play. If you roll the roll of a 1, the Bloody Masterpiece, model remains in play with a single wound, but is removed at the end of the next player turn. But gains +1 strength and attack, so turns into a bit of a monster for a turn and then keels over dead. He also reduces leadership of anyone near to him, friendly and enemy, because of his fairly bloody-handed reputation. And also he can't be shot at until enemies are within 12 inches, either by shooting or reaction, which is quite cool. Keep him alive a bit longer. I don't know how often we'll see him. He's a characterful choice, he's fun, and the model is beautiful. But I think I'd rather just have 4 medics scattered across units for the same points cost. Ogryns, these are the very cool Forge World models with the masks and claws. These guys hit like a ton of bricks. Strength 5 base, they're tough, they're toughness 5, 3 wounds each, 4 attacks apiece. They've got Feel No Pain 5-up built in, they've got Hammer of Wrath, they've got Rage, they've got Death Frenzy, so they fight on death. They've got Void Armor on, and they have the Charonite Claws. These are Strength 7, AP 3, Rending 6-ups. These things will walk through Space Marines and not blink, and probably not take too many wounds in return. You can have a unit of up to 9 of them for an extra 40 points per model. I really like these guys. If they weren't quite so expensive in real world money to buy, I think we'd see these in basically every list, but a solar list at the moment is not one you play with a small wallet, so maybe we'll see them in every list anyway. On to the troops then, the infantry tertio. This is very much the heart of the list, and you'd expect kind of a solar player to be playing with at least 3, maybe 4 infantry tertios, depending on their doctrine, whether they've got other non-compulsory troops. 0 to 1 on the command sections, and then 1 to 3 rifle sections, unless you're playing with the Ultramar one, which is 1 to 6. They're pretty much what you'd expect. They're basically guardsman level stats, so 3s across the board. Access to some special weapons in the command line section, as well as the command vox and the vexillas and stuff, which I'll come to in a bit. Nothing really too exciting. Even the command section has line, so the entire tertio gets line, which is cool. And then the rifle section's very similar, so guardsman stat line across the board. No option to upgrade that. There's no kind of special sergeant upgrade or anything like that. Sergeant has the weapon options, but everyone else is pretty much basic. Everyone can have a bayonet, and you can have the Vox, Interlock, Auxilia, Vexilla, or the Augury Scanner. It's only 5 points for the Augury Scanner, and on mass las rifles I could see that being quite effective, but we'll see. The Dracosan Armoured Transport. So this is the big Horde World transport for the Solar. 175 base, 5 hull points. It's essentially a lower armoured Land Raider. Has one las cannon on the front, can take pinter weapons, but does have the option, as we can see in the image here, to replace its front las cannon with a Demolisher cannon. It does mean you go down to transport 10 from 22, so you're looking at your 10-man squads for this. But a Demolisher cannon is a Demolisher cannon, and, you know, nothing to sniff at. Aurochs, this is your Rhino. Nothing really else to be said on that. The stats are almost identical to a Rhino, it's just BS3. Movement 15 though, which is cool, and transport 10. Arvus, the flying box of death that's, you know, made of wet cardboard. 2 hull points. Has searchlights on it, but has no gun. And a single access point in the rear. It does have deep strike though, so, you know, play with that if you want to. Air support, so you've got the Primaris Lightning or the Thunderbolt, and 2 of my favourite models from the Forge World range. I really, really like these flyers, and I think we'll see quite a lot of use, particularly of the Lightning. The Lightning was a go-to standard for Astartes players in first edition. We saw a lot of them with the Kraken Penetrators. Kraken Penetrators are still here. They are still as good as they were. They are absolute anti-tank legends still. They will go through almost any tank like a knife through hot button. Or a hot knife through butter even. Sun Furies are the other missile option. They've had a bit of a glow up. They're better now. They're much more worth taking, especially against power armor because they're AP3. So they're going to burn through big tactical squads without blinking. The Thunderbolt is basically your Xiphon equivalent, so that's your air superiority, arrive when the opponent does reacting aircraft. 4 autocannons and 2 las cannons when it comes in. And as far as I can tell, is going to put down a lot of hurt. It's going to sting. It can also take some cheap anti-tank or anti-air missiles, 15 or 20 points, and you get 4 of them. Hell Strikes and Sky Strikes, so anyone who's played Aeronautica Imperialis will know those. On to the fun bit. This is my favourite part of the book, the fact I can have... I can essentially take a Leman Russ armoured company for a single Force Organisation slot. I can have 9 Leman Russes in a single Force Org slot, and I love it. The command section is basically a single Leman Russ. It's 200 points. The thing that's slightly disappointing is it has no upgrades on the turret gun. It can only have a battle cannon, so you can't have like your Vanquisher commander like you'd like to in the kind of the old school. When you got the old box outs of like the command tank and the 3 squadrons, and always had like a Vanquisher or a Demolisher as the command tank. You can't do that, but that's fine. Hull options: auto cannon, multi laser, las cannon, things like that. The command tank can also have a flare shield and a Cognis Signum. The fact it can have a Cognis Signum makes me a little bit less annoyed that it only has a battle cannon. Because obviously you can't fire if you want to use the Cognis, so boosting the ballistic skill of nearby Leman Russes up to 4, especially if you gave it, for example, the Gravis las cannon turrets, things like that, not to be sniffed at all. The tercios themselves, the actual squadrons, you have two options. You have two flavours of squadron. You have the strike squadron, which is your Leman Russ battle cannons, your las cannons, your auto cannons, and your vanquishers. And then you have your assault squadrons, which is your demolishers, basically. And they can swap out for a plasma cannon or a Volkite macro Seeker as well. I think we'll probably see a mixture of all of these in play. The strike squadron with twin las cannons is a great way to get some anti-tank into an otherwise infantry flavoured list, especially if you have the command section with the Cognis Signum. So you've got 2 Gravis las cannons firing at BS4, times that by 3, so you've got 6 las cannon shots hitting on 3s for 450 points, mounted on a chassis that can move and fire. They also all have outflank. The assault squadron doesn't have outflank. The strike squadron and the command section do. So you could have 6 Leman Russes and a commander outflanking with las cannons and a Cognis Signum, and saying goodbye to anything with a flare shield or any kind of light armor at all. Very cool. Really a big fan of this. Loving the idea of taking a lot of Russes. The artillery tercio. This isn't what I thought it was when I first saw it in the contents page. I thought this was going to be the basilisks and medusas and things. It's actually the rapiers and tarantulas. So again, 1 to 3 of the rapiers and tarantulas, 0 to 1 of the command sections. The command section does have some benefit. You can have the Cognis Signum, for example, so you can boost the ballistic skill of your rapiers and tarantulas. I think I would probably do maybe 1 of each. 1 command, 1 rapier, 1 tarantula, or 1 command and 2 rapiers. The rapier batteries themselves, the tarantula batteries themselves start with 2 heavy bolters and can upgrade to las cannons or a Hyperios missile launcher, but the entire unit has to have the same option. You start with 3, so you're starting off, if you go for the missile launcher, you have 3 anti-air units for 65 points a model. 60 points for 3 and then 5 points each, so 75 points for some of the better anti-air, and they can all have augury scanners as well. So yeah, it's potentially another nail in the coffin of flyers. I know flyers are in a bit of a rough spot already, so whether this will be another kind of reason not to take them, hard to say. Worst case scenario, it's some fun las cannons, so can't go wrong with that. The rapier auxiliary rapier battery, starts with a multi-laser, as we see on the Forge World model, but that can upgrade to either a Gravis heavy bolter battery, a laser destroyer, or a quad launcher. So you can have the mortar still, which is cool. The mortar has some shell options: incendiary, shatter, and splinter, same as the Astartes. They have relentless. It's what you'd expect from the rapier battery, really. I think these will be quite common. I think the quad launcher one will absolutely be quite common. Pinning frag shells is no bad thing. Maybe see some of the laser destroyers as well for some anti-tank, especially if you haven't taken things like Leman Russes or Tarantulas, but we will see. At 35 points a model, they're nice and cheap, and that gets you the 2 gunners and the carrier. Moving on, the Malkador heavy tank. This is 225 points base, and you can have up to 3 in a squadron at 225 extra. These guys are absolutely loaded with weaponry. They have a hull-mounted heavy bolter, a hull-mounted battle cannon, spons and heavy bolters. You can give them upgrades to the hull-mounted weaponry. You can give them pintle weaponry. You can upgrade their sponsons. You can have a flare shield. And each of those guns, because of independent fire control, can target independently. So you can target 4 separate units with 4 guns, basically. 5 hull points, decent armor. I love the model as well. The model is lovely, and I'm really hoping that these rules get them back on the table, because they got a bit of a dip towards the end of first edition. So it'd be great to see the Malkador back on the table again. The armoured battery. So interesting, these two don't have the Tercio rule, so these are taken purely as a squadron, as a single Force Org slot. You can't have 9 Basilisks in one Force Org, for example, which is probably sensible. They're 200 points each. It's an Earthshaker cannon. You can swap it out for a Medusa. You can have pintle weaponry. Has the Bombard unit type, so if you're playing Custodes, these are also Nemesis for you. It's a Basilisk. It does what it says on the tin. The Valdor tank destroyers, these are 250. It does say these are a squadron. However, they're a squadron of 1 at all times. You can't add another model to the unit. The Neuron Beam is not exactly a tickling weapon. It's Ordnance 2, Strength 10, AP 1, Concussive 3, Shock Pulse, and Gets Hot. So this thing will eat through armour like there's no tomorrow. However, because it does eat through armour, it does go big bang if it explodes, which is cool. I think it's a D6 plus 3 on the explosion. It can have a flare shield though, and given it's going to be pointing its front at whatever's most dangerous, I don't think it's in too much risk of being destroyed early on. But we'll see. 250 is quite a high points investment, but you know it can put in some work for you. And then the little explosive that could, the Cyclops is back. It's 35 points. You can have up to 3 in the unit. Each one comes with an operator. You can have dedicated transports for them, so you can drive them out the back of Aurochs or Arvus transports. You can even give it a Dracosan if you really want to, which feels a bit excessive. They are bulky 5, so if you're having... you could have, for example, 2 of them in an Arvus, but if you had an Aurochs, you could only fit 1, because the second one with its operator would push you over the limit of 10. But a Dracosan armoured transport would fit all 3 with room to spare. The way that these guys blow up now is interesting. They blow up in Assault. It's a Strength 10, AP 1, Armour Bane, Instant Death, Brutal 2 hit, but only attacks a single model. It's not a template anymore. So this thing, you don't want to be driving it into a blob of units or a blob of Terminators. You want this thing to be hitting fortifications, vehicles, things like that. But it will absolutely put in the work when it gets there. Or go and target the enemy's warlord and blow them up with a small bomb on wheels because it's funny. Infernus, massive flamer with its fuel tank tagging along behind it. 300 points reinforced. This thing, it takes fire to a whole new level. Strength 8, AP 4, breaching 6 up, ordnance, torrent 9 inches, and concussive. This thing lays down an absolute wall of fire and dares you to walk through it, basically. It also starts with Sponson Heavy Flamers, just in case you didn't have enough fire. It can have a flare shield, can have a dozer blade, and you can have some pintle weapon on it. It's a brilliant model. I really hope we see it, and I'm excited to see it go boom at some point. The Stormhammer, the only Lord of War choice for the Solar. It's 500 points, so you can play it in a 2k list. 12 hull points, armor 13, 13, 12, super heavy. Again, a large selection of weaponry. The Stormhammer cannon, coaxial multi-laser, twin-link battle cannon, hull-mounted las cannon, 3 hull-mounted multi-lasers on each side. The multi-lasers are upgradable to heavy bolters or heavy flamers or las cannons. The pintle weapons are available, but the battle cannon and the top gun are not able to be upgraded. It's a bunker that fires in all directions. What's not to like? With it being 500 points, I really hope we see it in some lists. It wouldn't be too hard in a solo list to fit that into a 2k list, let alone a 3k list. And it looks like a beautiful model as well, so hopefully we see that on the table a bit more. The main gun is a little bit lackluster. Strength 8, AP 3, massive blast ordnance. Yeah, it's not fantastic, but when you weigh it up against the sum total of all the other guns it has on it, I think it's going to put some work in. So I'm very excited to see what they can do with it. I would like to see something like Brutal, maybe, or Breaching on the main gun, but such is life. Maybe it will come in with the FAQ. That brings us to the end of the Solar Auxilia. Just the Assassins left to go, so please join me back in a moment for that. And the Assassins. I've been looking forward to the Assassins joining 30k for ages. I'm not saying they're good. I'm not saying that each one is going to be competitive. I also don't care. That's not why I play Heresy. They're hilarious. Some of them have really cool abilities, and it's just really nice to see it expanding the scope and breadth of the Heresy with this slightly unusual unit choice. What is made very clear is that this is not the sum total of the Assassins we'll see. These are the Clades, these are the Loyalist Clades that serve the Emperor and serve Malcador. They can only be taken by Loyalists, they are distrusted allies. They do use up an HQ slot in the primary detachment. But yeah, it's very, very strongly hinted that there are more to come in things like campaign books, potentially even things like White Dwarf. yeah. So the 7 in here are not the sum total. There will be more. And that's very cool too. That's very exciting. I hope we see the Demon Assassin out of Nemesis. That'd be awesome. Does come with a new unit subtype called Assassin, unsurprisingly. Essentially, you ignore terrain movement penalties for movement and charging. You auto-pass dangerous terrain tests. You can't be joined by independent characters. I don't think anyone would, but just to kind of preempt any kind of gaminess, you can't stick, a Master of Signal next to a Vindicare Assassin. They can never use transports, and they can't be your Warlord. Nothing too surprising there. The movement ability is cool, and means they're very, very flexible on the board. On top of that, they have their advanced reaction. It's a unique one. It does use up one of your allocation in the shooting phase. Essentially, when they get shot at, you can make a movement up to twice your initiative value. Must end up 1 inch away from enemies and not within impassable terrain. But if you've moved out of line of sight or range of the attacking unit, the attacking unit must, or is unable to shoot and cannot select another target. So you basically waste their shooting, which is quite cool. As you disappear off into the night in a blur of sin skin bodysuit. All of the assassins are 125 points. They have no options. You have to just take them as they are. They all come with the Panoply of Assassins, which is 4 up armor and 4 up invuln. They all have Infiltrate, Scout, and Support Squad, and they're Loyalist only, as I say. So these can't be a compulsory HQ, but they've got a good range of rules and a fairly solid 4 up invulnerable. The armor's never really going to come into play. It's going to be taking on the invulnerable all the time. On to the units then. First one, most people's kind of archetypical favourite, the Sniper Assassin, the Vindicare, Clade Vindicare. Ballistic skill 8, so you're hitting on 2s with a reroll of, I think, 4s from memory. Strength 4, Toughness 4, 2 wounds, Initiative 5. Yeah, this guy you want nowhere near the enemy. Put him in a back corner somewhere and just shoot. When he makes a shooting attack, he ignores any modifiers that limit range or to hit rolls. So if you're firing against like the Sisters of Silence stuff we saw earlier with the -6 to your range, he ignores that. If you have anything that says you hit on 5s or 6s, he ignores that and hits you on 2s. The Extus rifle itself is 100-inch range, strength 7, AP 2, heavy 1, murderous strike 5, rending 6 up, sniper. The strength 7 is the only thing I think that lets it down, but I think strength 8 would have pushed it too far for 125 points. You've still got the option, or the chance, to instant kill toughness 4 Space Marines with murderous strike. It's still AP 2. You've got sniper on it as well, so you can pick the model you shoot. The Extus pistol, it's a 3-shot, breaching 6 up, strength 4, AP 4 pistol. Pistol, yeah, you don't take this assassin for the pistol, but it's nice to have as a benefit. But yeah, the Extus rifle, I could see it being a little bit more potent, but I'm happy with it where it is. I think it's about right. It's balanced without being, disgustingly overpowered. The Colexus, so this is your anti-psyker assassin. A few more special rules. Has Fear, Adamantium Will, 3+, Life Drain. Has the Anathema unit type as well. The stat line for this one is pretty much bang on the line. It's basically a veteran Space Marine with a 4-up save and leadership 10. So 4s across the board mainly, with 5 on the initiative and 2 on the wounds. You always snap shoot against them. You can never shoot them at normal ballistic skill unless you're a Vindicare Assassin. The Animus Speculum is basically a psychic flamer. Strength 4, AP 4, Force, so you can put up to strength 6. Psy Shock and rending 6 up. And then you have Life Drain. So this is a melee attack. You can use all 3 of your base attacks plus any charge bonuses, and it has Reaping Blow, so you get an extra one for being outnumbered. You wound on 2s with Fleshbane and it's AP 2, so this thing just sucks in the souls of whoever it is that's around them. They also have Psych Out Grenades just for good measure, so a great one to potentially pair with Sisters of Silence to go full anti-Psyker, or to add some anti-Psyker into any standard list if you know you're going to be playing against Word Bearers or Thousand Suns. The Calidus, this is the shape-shifting assassin, so Weapon skill 5, initiative 6, otherwise pretty much par for the course with 4s on strength and toughness and 2 wounds. Polymorphine can never be targeted for a shooting attack, a charge, or a reaction unless you have made a shooting attack at some point with this unit. So if you choose never to shoot with this model, the enemy cannot shoot or charge it. That's fine. However, as pointed out to me by a friend of mine, it does mean that they're still a denial unit, so you can stick them on an objective, the enemy can do nothing about them, and they're denying that objective. I'm not saying that's a good use of 125 points, but it is a possible use of 125 points. The other thing to bear in mind, Reign of Confusion, if your opponent wins the seize the initiative roll, you can make them re-roll it, so you basically almost always denying them seize the initiative. They've got a 1 in 36 chance of it. The Neural Shredder is it's a flamer. Pistol 1, rending 5 up, synaptic disruptor. On a wound roll of a 6+, the target model automatically suffers a wound with no armor saves, invulnerable saves, or damage mitigation allowed. Has no effect against things that don't have a toughness characteristic. And then the Phase Sword, strength 3, fine. Given that it ignores all saves on a roll of a 6, has rending 5+, that's fine. I think wounding on 5s is probably fair. It also helps balance out the polymorphine a little bit. So what you can do with this assassin, you can charge and you can fight and not lose the polymorphine ability. It's just when you make a shooting attack. So as long as you charge and wipe a unit, you still can't be shot at. Which is interesting. It gives you a bit of counter attack with it. But with the strength 3 weapon in melee, I don't know how much you'll necessarily end up wiping units out. I think it's probably quite unlikely. And given that your toughness 4, 2 wounds, 4 up save, maybe you don't want to be in combat a huge amount, even at weapon skill 5. So I think this is very much going to be a disruption unit. I don't think it's really going to be a unit that's doing a huge amount for you in combat. I would have liked maybe seeing something like a assassination type thing in here for the Phase Sword. So if you're in a challenge, for example, you wound on you get Fleshbane maybe, but lose AP 1, I don't know. Something to make them kind of fit into that lore side of them taking out commanders without them really realising they're there type thing. The Eversaw is the blender you always wanted him to be. Weapon skill 5, initiative 6, counter attack. You can have up to 3 extra attacks, but 1's to hit do a wound to him but can take an armor save. He has 3 wounds rather than 2, unlike the other assassins. If he's killed, he explodes for a strength 4, AP 3 and a D6 range with Fleshbane. Has Melter Bombs as standard. The Gauntlet and the Neuro Gauntlet is a Fleshbane AP 3, as I say, with Shred 6 up. Shred and Rending 6 up. The gun is a combi weapon that you can fire both parts of, so you get 3 shots a turn, 1 at strength 4 AP 5 and 1 at poison 3 up pinning. 2 at poison 3 up pinning. He's fun. I could very well see myself using him as just a cannonball to run down one flank, keeping him in cover until he gets close, use Infiltrate and Scout, or even outflank him using those rules potentially, and then just have him blow up in the enemy's line somewhere. Just a good fun use of 125 points. Cladodamus, I've actually got one of these waiting for me in my pile of plastic, so I'll do a review of that shortly and put that up as well. One, I love the model. I think the model is a really nice touchback to the original Imperial Assassin, mixed with a bit more kind of modernisation in line with things like Deadpool and Deadshot. Weapon skill 5, fine. Initiative 5, okay. Where he gets his fun is in his weapon and the decapitation strike. So his Nemesis Blade, his samurai sword basically, is +1 strength and AP 3. So your strength 5 AP 3 with 4 attacks, 5 on the charge. 5 attacks because he has a pistol, so he has 2 weapons. So 6 on the charge. Melee, rending 5 up. This thing is going to chew through most tactical marine squads and equivalents without too much difficulty. The Needle Spine Blaster counts as a combi weapon, but is a pistol, so you do get +1 attack. You can shoot both parts without needing fire control. Firing protocols. The Needle Spine itself is poison 2 up and pinning, and the Bolter is a pistol 3 bolter, so strength 4 AP 5. My favourite rule for him though is the Decapitation Strike. So during any fight sub-phase, if you're in a challenge, I think, nope, any point. So just for being in combat, instead of doing his normal attacks, you can do a single attack with melee, unwieldy, fleshbane, and murderous strike 2 up. So you're hitting on 3s, wounding on 2s, and doing instant death at AP 1. This is obviously very risky. This is not going to pan out against Space Marines 50% of the time based on their invulnerable save, let alone the fact you're hitting generally on 4s. It's a massive, massive risk. But if you pull it off and instantly decapitate a Space Marine Praetor with an assassin, that is brilliant. I love that. It's so much fun. And equally, you have the Death's Artisan rule to help with exactly that. If you're in a challenge, you may choose to increase your weapon skill initiative to match your opponent. If you go with Decapitation, you're unwieldy, so you go back to Initiative 1, so the initiative is less important. But you match their weapon skill. You're hitting them on 4s and they're hitting you on 4s. Yeah, it's just fun. I don't think he's going to be good. I don't think he's going to pan out most of the time. But I want to try him, just for the fun of it. I think it's going to be a huge laugh to see how that goes. The Venom, your Poisoner. So this one is situational, I would say. So you're immune to Radphage and anything else that affects their toughness, like Rad Grenades. Poisoned weapons and Fleshbane weapons only ever wound you on a 5 up at least, if not a 6. You force the enemy to reroll successful charges. You have a Poison Flamer, which is strength 5, poison 3 up, rending 6. And you have a Poison Dagger, which means you continue to wound. So if someone suffers an unsaved wound, on a 5 up, the model suffers an additional wound with no saves of any kind. So you can, stab a multi-wound character, not kill them, and then just let them bleed slowly over time, which is quite cool. But yeah, very, very situational, lovely model, but not sure how much play they'll see in most lists, which is a bit of a shame. But equally, if the model is enough for you, as it should be, then by all means go for it. The Vanus Infocyte. This one's really interesting. It's the only one with the independent character rule. So you can attach them to other squads. It's very much a backline buffing kind of character. So it has the ability to stop infiltrators within 18 with the Auspector. When the enemy arrives from reserves, you can make an interceptor reaction without spending an allotment. But on top of that, you can take control of other weaponry and use that. So he can basically hack tanks or Autonomer. And he can hack tanks for Overwatch, vehicles for Overwatch, friendly or enemy. But he can also do effectively mortal wounds to Automata. He can hack them and basically put scrap code into those. His melee weapons are pretty cool. The Sympathetic Data Spikes. So they're Strength 6, AP 3, Rending, 4 up, Haywire, Specialist Weapons. Doesn't have a huge number of attacks, only 3 attacks. So 4 on the charge, but Strength 6, AP 3, not to be sniffed at. And with them having Haywire as well, he can quite easily take down at least a light vehicle without too much difficulty. And he can also have hit and run once per battle as well, so you can get him out of trouble. I think I prefer him to the Venom, or them to the Venom. The model is fantastic. The data spikes are cool. Being able to hack a tank is brilliant. Yeah, just a lot of fun. And that's it for the Assassins. I love the fact they're in the game. I like the fact they add some variation to lists. Most of them aren't competitive choices, but that's not what Heresy's about. That's not what Heresy's for. They're great fun. They look like they're going to be hilarious. They're going to add a new dimension onto the game. I think we'll see things like the Vindicare and the Eversaw quite a lot. I think we'll see the Caladius quite a lot. The Adamus, I'm going to take him, but I don't know how many other people will. Venom, I think, is the one we'll see the least, just based on their war gear and stats. and the Infocyte I can see being great against things like Mechanicum or tank armies, but they're fun to take either way. So yeah, thank you very much for coming to the review. That is the end of the video for today, and I'll be back again soon with the next review. If you have any comments, any feedback, feel free to leave it below, and hopefully see you again soon. All right, thank you everybody. Bye.